Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Appreciate you stopping by. Today we are talking about The Truman Show, a psychological comedy drama from 1998, written and produced by Andrew Niccol and directed by Peter Weir. Starring Jim Carrey, The Truman Show is about a man who lives the first half of his life unbeknownst to him as the main character of a television show. And apparently there's even an unofficial type of psychosis lovingly called Truman disorder, which really is just an offshoot or variant of delusions of grandeur and maybe a hint of solipsism, luckily none of which I am suffering from.
Stop it. Get some help.
I do find it interesting on the name choice, Truman. The true man, perhaps? The film begins with an interview of the show's creator in which he shares some details setting up the premise for us, the audience, who are about to become participants in the show as secret viewers of Truman's life. The director even says it's a life, giving us the first hint at the hidden meaning of the film, being that it's about our lives, us the audience in this 3D Earth plane. He tries to justify the project by stating that what he is doing is art, and that he has a great love for Truman. The director could be seen as representing God, being one that he's the creator of the show, and two that his name is Christoph, or of Christ. Need I say more? Later he even goes as far as being an actual voice from the heavens during the finale. In her interview, Truman's wife Meryl says it's a lifestyle and a blessing, suggesting that to have the opportunity to incarnate onto the earth plane is truly a blessing. Marlon, Truman's best friend, directly gives away the message by saying it's all true, it's all real. The character means the show, but the film is speaking to us, the audience, saying what you see portrayed here is real, is how reality is. One of the first signs of his world being a film set is him finding a stage light that has fallen from the dome surface. We see that it is labeled Sirius Canis Major, which is the brightest star in our night sky. Now it's quite a reach, but it could represent what many online spiritual circles believe to be celestial soul origins, some souls coming from the Pleiades, some from Arcturus, and some from Sirius, etc. Also, you may have seen this dome image used in many firmament videos. On the way to work, he hears a news flash about fallen airplane debris, obviously the showrunners trying to cover up for the fallen light. They also take the opportunity to tie in a bit of fear programming for Truman, asking if he plans to fly after just hearing about the airplane. This makes me think of the media and how much it is focused on impacting the masses. It's all about getting an emotional reaction from us, because that's what in part feeds this matrix. The camera angle in this next scene and its blatant attempt at advertisement reminds us that though it is a show about Truman, being us, it's still really about the greater picture. The money there is to be made, or the energy there is to be extracted, as above, so below. Truman offers these twins the doppelganger special, 2 for 1. Reminds me of the agent program in The Matrix, where Mouse, in an attempt to save time and effort, writes the program using several of the same models to make up the crowd. To illustrate this, the filmmakers cast actual twins and triplets. These represent NPCs or non-player characters, their purpose often being to progress the story of the player character in some way, be it positive or negative, as well as igniting some kind of emotional response to feed the Matrix. This point is obvious due to the fact that the twins in this scene are trying to push some product placement. Kaiser chicken sales equals energy extraction. Within the first few seconds here, we can tell that Truman is unsatisfied with his work as an insurance salesman. Funny how even his career is stemming from a fear of the unknown, more programming to keep him from trying to travel outside the comfort of his secure life in the show. To distract himself, he makes a quick call to the telephone directory for the Fiji Islands, and just at that moment a coworker pops up from behind a cubicle with a paper showing that their town has been voted one of the best places to live. More programming, of course. We hear Truman on the phone asking the directory about a listing for a Lauren or Sylvia Garland, a woman we see later as being someone important from his past. When we see that it's an old fling from college, it really seems reminiscent of the belief of a soulmate or twin flame, someone we feel is out there in the world, maybe Fiji, waiting for us to find them so we could be whole again. Granted, I don't know where I personally land on those beliefs. I used to have the feeling, and maybe I still do, that the idea of a soulmate is true in some sense, but that for many, maybe all of us, ours didn't incarnate into this life with us. And just like in this movie, and hell, even Trinity watching Neo, they are outside of this life, looking in, so to speak, watching us, rooting for us, and even guiding us. Though we do see later that Sylvia did in fact show up, or incarnate into his world with him for a time, I still think that her being largely out of it could represent this idea. As a response to his call to Fiji, it would appear that the showrunners have sent in someone to make up a reason for Truman to have to take the ferry to deliver some paperwork, in an attempt to remind him just how afraid of water he is. This should deter him from looking into going to any islands for a while. Later, Truman mentions to Marlon that he's thinking of quitting his job to go travel. Marlon responds with, "Where is there to go?" Classic scripted response, anything to keep Truman from thinking that he needs anything more than his hometown of Sea Haven. In an attempt to convince his friend of the promised land, he uses a golf ball as a mini globe to show where Fiji is, saying, "Can't get any further away before you start coming back." He really wants to get out of there. In this scene, we're shown a childhood memory where his father was killed off the show during a sailing trip by way of artificially generated storm. This obviously is where he gets his fear of open water. It represents how we often hold tight to our traumas that the Matrix creates for us. Unresolved trauma keeps us tethered to the past, resulting in us reliving the negative experiences, thus feeding the Matrix from recycled material, affecting who we believe ourselves to be, based off said memories, and our ability to manifest from a mindset of who we truly are, not what the Matrix has told us. Truman tries to talk his wife into going to Fiji, to which she responds with financial worries, saying we'd be back where we were 5 years ago. More fear based off memory. Though I'm not saying we shouldn't learn from our mistakes, which we only know due to memory, just that there's a balance to be found, and we often remain on autopilot, creating unconsciously out of fear. She goes on to list their responsibilities, mortgage, financial obligations, and lastly, that they were going to try for a baby. Translation: keep showing up to that 9 to 5, babe. Keep pumping out more taxpayers, more cogs for the machine, more opportunity for the Matrix to feed off of. She reassures him that we all think like this sometimes, and that it'll pass. And to help get his mind off of it, she plays the seductive card, appealing to his sex drive with "come to bed," as if to say, stay with me, go against what your heart desires, keep grinding for this American dream with me, and I'll take care of you, if you know what I mean. Happy wife, happy life. Sure. This scene with his mother suggests that it's not always easy, or even possible in some cases, to convince our family of our newfound revelations regarding our existence in this dream reality. They are often too attached to the collective belief system. Not always, but often. Some may even think of their family as being NPCs. Here we're shown a memory of his college days, and we see Sylvia for the first time. We're also shown him meeting his wife as well, and later in this scene, Truman finally gets a chance to actually meet Sylvia, though her character name in the show is Lauren. As we can see, she is breathtakingly beautiful, and seems to really be attracted to Truman as well. Makes sense, as she's likely grown up watching The Truman Show and so feels like she knows him already. Truman asks her to hang out sometime after finals, but she knows that the showrunners will likely not let it happen, as it's not in the script for them to be together, and so the only option is to go right then and there, since it would be more difficult for the powers that be to get between them while keeping Truman from catching on to anything. She says if we don't go now, it won't happen. This could represent living in the now, acting out of impulse, and following one's heart. There are some who feel like living a spontaneous life is the closest thing to freedom we can have in this matrix, since it's often made up of new experiences, one after the other, without the chance for habit to form, causing us to slip back into living unconsciously. There may be some truth to this. It somewhat reminds me of the 13th floor when Douglas is instructed to drive out of town, somewhere he'd never go, though some may relate more to it being a symbolic representation of getting out of one's cultural matrix, seeing how people in other countries live. Being that Sylvia works for the show, she is able to guide Truman to some place where they'd have a bit of privacy, at least for a time, during which she tries to tell him the truth of his reality. She's almost like the Trinity to his Neo. She pleads with him to believe her and that everyone is pretending and that they're all in on it. That it's all fake, it's all for you. And to get out of here and come find me. He tries to say he'll see her at school, but she says there is no school, which makes me wonder about the common belief of this world being like a school. Maybe there is no school. The man taking her says they're moving to Fiji, hence his obsession with Fiji. And hell, I would be too. I mean, just look at her eyes. Anyway, here we see he's attempting to recreate her features out of magazine clippings. It's here that he really begins to suspect something. He tries to explain his suspicions to Marlon, saying, maybe I'm being set up for something. Do you ever feel like your life is building towards something? In truth, he's right. Our lives are building towards every moment of now, when we experience the moment in an awakened state, fully lucid in who and what we are. Marlon represents people who follow dogmatic religions, hence the big guy, the anthropomorphizing of their creator god, the big guy in the sky. Marlon is content in his little world and thinks Truman should be too. Shouldn't question so much the ways of the world. After all, there is that little story of the angel who had quite a few questions of his own, and things didn't turn out so well for him. Here's a scene of his wife and mother going through baby pictures. Notice the one of Truman dressed as a clown behind what looks to be some staircase rails or a playpen. A performer, a dancing monkey, trapped in his cage. Nothing like photographs to further embed the concept of linear time and the reality of past memories creating who you are. His mother does her part by pressuring him for grandchildren, an agent of the Matrix hard at work. Here he's shown in a travel agency and is greeted by yet more fear programming regarding air travel. After the bus won't start, the driver says, "I'm sorry, son," almost like he's saying, "I'm sorry, son, this is the nature of your existence." For some reason I get this whole wise stranger as God vibe, the same archetype I saw in Sucker Punch. After a domestic dispute between him and Meryl, we're shown Truman confiding in Marlon again, saying, "Maybe I'm losing my mind, but it feels like the whole world revolves around me." Marlon tries to ease his confusion by suggesting that it may be wishful thinking, that it may come from him feeling like he should have done more with his life. This is of course the go-to conclusion for people trying to explain away why we, the awakened ones, have these feelings. It's an attempt to keep us under the illusion. Granted, that's not to say that many of us haven't squandered our life and talents. Anyway. After Marlon reunites Truman with his long-lost father, we see the network rejoicing in Christoph's directorial prowess. That's just good TV. This is yet another example of the farming of both positive and negative emotions that we experience in our lives. Makes for good ratings. It's here that we've reached the middle of the film and are given a montage of the history of The Truman Show, as well as more glimpses at the audience and the sheer magnitude of the impact that the show has had on society outside of the dome. Followed by an interview with the director Christoph in the Lunar Room, which could represent any given moon conspiracy, take your pick, from it having hidden bases on the dark side to it being fake altogether. Funny how the moon, being Earth's satellite, is the main broadcasting room for Truman Show via satellite. During the interview, Christoph discusses why Truman's father was written off the show, being that they needed to manufacture ways to keep him on the island, to keep him from exploring. As his dad put it to him, "You've got to know your limits, Truman." When sharing in class that he'd like to be an explorer, his teacher tells him there's really nothing left to explore. To which I would argue there being one final frontier, that of inner space. The many attempts from outsiders could symbolize extraterrestrial beings coming to Earth in an attempt to wake us up from the illusion of our reality. Christoph explains that Truman being born 2 weeks early made him the right candidate because he arrived right on cue. This makes me think of how souls choose to incarnate into specific bodies and lifetimes. The interviewer also mentions that Truman was the first person to be adopted by a corporation. This makes me think of the legal practice that is used in referring to a person as being a corporation, which is why your name on your ID and birth certificate is in all capital letters, because according to the government, you are not a person, you are a corporation, a commodity. See Kymatica for more detail. Would you like to know more? Finally, the interviewer asks him why he thinks Truman hasn't begun to question his reality until now, to which Christoph responds with a powerfully insightful answer, that we accept the reality of the world in which we've been presented, It's as simple as that. During the interview, Sylvia calls in as a viewer demanding Truman's freedom. She could represent beings on the outside working to lift the illusion. Christof describes her as a former cast member. This could mean ancestors guiding us, or ascended masters, or beings who have awakened from their own matrix who work towards helping others still asleep. Christof goes on to explain that where she lives is the sick place, that Sea Haven is the way the world should be. He goes on saying he can leave any time, if his was more than just a vague ambition. If he was absolutely determined to discover the truth, there's no way we could prevent him. He says that what really distresses Sylvia is that Truman prefers his cell. Oof, that hits home. After his long-lost father returning to his life, Truman has begun to get back to his old self. This feels like how we often slip back into autopilot, living unconscious lives. But no matter how long we stay, there really is no going back once one has begun to awaken. He appears to have come to a sort of acceptance in his situation, and seems to be playing it up even more, literally acting his part. This too is relatable to those of us who have this ever-evolving inner world unfolding, whilst also having to deal with the everyday society of the sleeping masses. He even seems refreshed in his work life. And oh, what's this? The lady in red. Where have we seen her before? Though it's not long before Truman finds a way to sneak past the cameras, which has the network in a frenzy. They have all the available extras and crew out of their homes searching. Sorta reminds me of the film They Live. And in their desperation, the network decides to cut straight through the night and on into the morning. After cueing the sun early, they tell all the extras to get into their starting positions. This makes me think of the starting positions in the Dark City after the nightly tuning. After discovering that Truman has sailed out into the sea, they resort to capsizing his boat with a generated storm. They even say, "We're going to be accessing the weather program," which of course is hinting at the conspiracies of weather wars, etc. Here Truman is, in a way, doing what many mystics and adepts have done for centuries, going out into nature and facing the elements, even at the face of death, all for the purpose of enlightenment. At this point, he has done just that, stared death in the face for the truth of his being. Here he pierces the firmament, or the veil, if you will. Here's a little Christ symbolism for you, walking on water. And the stairway to heaven and door to the beyond. Finally, in a last-ditch effort to stop him, Christof decides to speak from the heavens to Truman, explaining to him that he is the creator of a television show that gives hope and joy to millions, that Truman is the star. He says something here that I feel may apply to us in our story. He says, "There is no more truth out there than there is in the world I have created for you. That the world outside has the same lies and deceit, but that in his world, he has nothing to fear." This feels like it may be hinting at certain beliefs regarding the macrocosm beyond this physical microcosm, sort of an as above so below moment. Christof says, "I know you better than you know yourself," and Truman responds with, "You never had a camera in my head," which makes me wonder if it's just our actions that are recorded in this life and not our thoughts, that there's at least some privacy in that regard. Though exactly what our thoughts are usually show up in our actions, so perhaps it's not necessary for our thoughts to be known. You can often tell where the mind has been by the world they create for themselves. Christof tells him he understands, that he's been watching him his whole life. You can see that Christof truly does care for Truman, like a son, further cementing the God the Father, Christ the Son motif. He tells him he belongs here, tells him to say something to his audience around the world. And with that, Truman makes up his mind to leave and takes his final bow. As we can see, people around the world are rejoicing in his courage. Only to then calm back down and flip the channel to see what else is on, which personally feels like a jab at our consumer culture. These people just witnessed this real-life person's world be torn from under him, and they can't just let it simmer for a little bit? Anyway, that about wraps up my video on The Truman Show. Thank you so much for sticking through to the end. And I know there are tons of videos out there on some of these movies, so the fact that you take the time to listen to my input really does mean a lot. So thank you so much. Anyway, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. He tries to say he'll skeeter at school. Classic. Must be an inner city school.